Hi, this is Sarah Meixel with the Pig Site, working in collaboration with LifeStart Swine. And today we're online with Dr. Emma Baxter. She is an animal welfare and behavior scientist at Scotland's Rural College. Dr. Baxter specializes in pigs with projects covering challenges throughout the pig's life cycle, from optimizing pig survival in high welfare farrowing systems to investigating humane stunning at slaughter. Thanks for being with us today, Dr. Baxter.
Nice to see you. Happy to be here.
And today we're going to talk about how sow birth rates continue to rise, but piglet birth weights are falling. Dr. Baxter, what's causing this low birth weight in piglets?
Well, the number of piglets is one of the main causes there. So pigs as a litter species, they've always had a number of low birth weights. We would call them runts in the litter, but breeding for higher numbers born has had an effect on the average birth weight, but also the within litter birth weight variation. So we have more of these tail end piglets, and the main reason is the fact that there are just simply so many more of them born, and there's just not enough space in the uterine horn, so they are sharing resources, and you have this distribution that's shifted to the lower birth weight.
Very good. And what role does genetic selection play in low birth weight piglets? As you said, we are having more sows, or sows are having more piglets, and that is something that I believe probably genetic selection has a place in, right?
Yes, I'd say it's the main trigger. I mean, there are environmental factors as well, and nutritional factors that can, and of course, health factors that can affect birth weight of pigs. But if there's a major health issue, then it can often affect the whole litter, and you may have more losses. But pushing for larger numbers born has been the main factor. Sort of pushing for larger numbers weaned would be a more balanced way of doing things, so that you're more likely to have more robust piglets if you do that.
And is it working? Is genetic selection for more piglets really working for the industry?
Well, you'd probably you'd ask the farmers on farm. I think things haven't changed over the answers I get from farmers when I'm out in the field is I want 12 healthy ones born, 12 to
Right.
14. It's shifted a little bit. It used to be I want 12 healthy ones born alive and I want 12 healthy weaners, right? But they kind of know they're going to get runs. It has shifted a little bit in that they're like, I would like 14, 15, great, but they need to be healthy, they need to thrive, and they need to, get going for weaning and be able to, go all the way through to finishing. So there's been a little bit of a shift. They like having more, but they don't want 20s. They don't want, more than the sow can rear. It's a lot of work. So I would say it isn't working, because the numbers that are being born to the sow need so many more interventions by the staff, by the stock people. They can need to be quite specialized interventions a lot of the time, and it can be very overwhelming. It can be incredibly overwhelming, not only for the animals themselves, but also for the staff. So there are efforts, I think, from a breeding companies to change that trajectory, but going all the way back to the way it was before, I'm not sure that that's ever
Right.
going to be on the cards.
Excellent. Very good. What does your research tell us about low birth weight piglets?
Well, in terms of, well, obviously piglet survival is multifactorial, so there's all these different things can influence it. But in terms of the physical parameters that influence it, really birth weight is key. It continues to be key. However, there's other factors coming in. So you can get low birth weight animals that are behaviorally incredibly switched on. They've got really good vigor. So I would say that they're sort of these small and perfectly formed animals that show real gumption, real get up and go, and they want to survive. And if they're in a litter of equally sized litter mates that also show that, then I don't think there's not a problem. They just happen to be at a low birth weight, but they're doing all the right things to get the colostrum to, pick up their thermoregulation and survive. You then have a lot of animals that are low birth weight, but we would put them more towards the intrauterine growth retarded side of things. So
Okay.
these are small and not perfectly formed. So they are not small for gestational age. They are growth retarded. So those animals have suffered more pathologies in utero, and they're born more compromised. And there's different gradations of this. So you can have severely IUGR piglets, and these are pigs that have specific characteristics. They have dome-shaped heads. This is called brain sparing because more of the energy has been put into the most important organ, which is the brain, but at the expense of lots of other things like their guts, like their liver, their other organs. So they're pathologically, they may well be the ones that either die during birth or they die soon after. And then you might have ones that are more moderately growth retarded, and they might be saved, but they need so much more intervention.
Right.
And then you have ones that are sort of mildly IUGR. But the point is, we have more of these. So there's about 30 to 40% in hyperprolific litters or super prolific litters. There is some data now showing that they make up, those kind of tail end pigs make up about 30 to 40% of a litter. So that is a
That's a lot.
significant number.
Yeah.
What it's what it's sort of telling me is we have more animals that are low birth weight, and they are far more vulnerable. When you have low birth weight animals, you have animals that are challenged from hypothermia, and they're challenged from being able to get colostrum, and they're also competing with all their litter mates as well to get that colostrum because they're also generally in a much larger litter.
And we should just define low birth weight from a tactical standpoint. What is considered low birth weight from a grams, I guess, is what you guys would
Yeah, sorry, you might need to convert it to pounds and
right.
yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that in my head. Well, about when I started about 20 years ago, low birth weight, it used to be anything under a kilo or 1.1 kilos used to be thought of,
Okay.
well, this is vulnerable, this is one that's less likely to survive, and usually you get one or two of those in a litter. That's also shifted now. So we still say anything under a kilo, but you can now get animals under a kilo or 800 grams to a kilo that with a lot of intervention, they can survive. Now, there may be other issues later, which we can tackle or not. So I'd say anything under a kilo is still defined as low birth weight. I
Okay.
think anything under like 800 grams, you're getting closer to the growth retarded type animals, but it's not always relative to weight. It's more the characteristic. More and more for farmers, not only are you looking at weight, you probably need to look at their characteristics, their physical characteristics, which are these head shapes, these different head
Huh.
morphologies that we see in these animals.
And how do you make a decision then on whether to keep that animal or to call it, I guess? Is that
Yeah.
the way to say that, maybe?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, again, in the pig industry with a litter species, a certain amount of mortality is expected. It is expected in the wild,
Right.
Sows are genetically predisposed, our wild boar ancestors, to overproduce in these insurance offspring, and that's just been
Yeah.
exploited. So it's not unusual. I think that's important to say, but there's an inevitability about some, but now it's become unacceptable because we have more of those.
Right.
So to making those decisions is such an important thing for welfare. So I think it can be very overwhelming for stock people when they first come in. I've got all of these piglets and I've got all of the sows are full. What can I do? I think the first thing to do is not stop and think and not
Right.
panic. Um, but then some of the decisions can be made based on the characteristics. So some of these very growth retarded animals, they need to be as humanely as possible dispatched or culled. And then the other ones, it's about looking at their characteristics, looking at their behavior, making sure they've got colostrum, making
Right.
sure they've got colostrum from their own mother, making sure the whole litter has, and probably things like split suckling to start off with,
Mhm.
and then having to make decisions about cross fostering so that you have special care babies that are
Yeah.
with a sow that can take care of them. So you match up teats with piglet mouth size. I mean, it's kind of basics, right? But it takes observation. It takes you stopping, thinking about it, making an inventory, helping the ones you can help, humanely dealing with the ones you can't, and then taking it from there. What you really want is you want the sow to be able to rear her own piglets in the long
Right,
run.
right. Very good. And we started talking about this is what does your research suggest? And you kind of started talking about that you really have to make decisions kind of on the fly because this isn't the only sow, right? That's delivering. You've got a whole barn full of sows
Yeah.
that these caretakers are watching and helping.
And I think what would really help and is possibly missing, but maybe some really good units have it, is almost like a decision support tool, so a decision tree to go through. So what we know about the colostrum is key, right? The
Right.
piglets are born immune naive, so they need to have colostrum, but they also need warmth first. So they
Mhm.
can't absorb that colostrum properly unless they're warm. And actually, a lot of mortality, it gets put down to crushing by the sow, but there's this hypothermia, starvation, crushing complex, and often it's just the animals are so chilled that they can't get to the udder, get the colostrum, start to thermoregulate themselves, and then avoid the sow. So I think what would help on farm is to have those decision support trees going on, making sure, okay, are there piglets at the udder? Are they suckling? Have they got full bellies? Make sure the ones that have got full bellies, you mark them. Always have a marker pen. Always have that, and then dab on their heads. So you come back and right, they've suckled. Right, these must be newborn. We need to help them suckling, but we need to warm them in a creep area first if they're chilled. And then if there's too many piglets for each sow going on, you need to probably split suckle and have a really good management routine there where you're swapping the larger ones and the smaller ones very regularly.
Mhm.
Really, it's got to be really well administrated basically for want of a better word,
Right.
because I think that's the only way you can stop it being overwhelming on farm. Now that's a short-term thing. Long term, there needs to be much more balanced situation there from a breeding situation. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned, but mothers matter. Your sow is so important. And these girls are going through a phenomenal process of farrowing lots and lots of piglets.
Right.
They always have done, right? But we've gone from a situation where your average farrowing time was 2 to 4 hours,
Yeah.
maybe birth rates every 20 minutes. That's okay. If it goes above that, you've got a piglet that may have been a bit oxygen compromised. We've gone from that to close to 7 to 8
Oh my
hours,
gosh.
right?
Right.
And some of these I call them super prolifics, not high prolifics. They are, 9 hours. These girls are involved in a marathon.
Right.
And if you're involved in or multiple marathons, and if you're involved in a marathon, you got to prep yourself for a marathon, right? You got to eat right, you got to drink. And the other thing I always say is don't do drugs. And that's because there'll be a temptation to pop oxytocin in her if she's struggling to give birth anymore. That needs to be managed because that's not that there's plenty of data to show that actually can cause more problems. It can cause more stillbirths. It can be incredibly painful for the sow. So there's other ways to manage that, but I'm possibly getting off track. But what I would say is that the sows need to be as fit as they can going into
Right.
farrowing, and providing, high fiber transition diets, providing nesting material and substrate so that they can, have that behavioral outlet which gets the oxytocin going naturally. Of course, looking at alternative farrowing systems,
Right.
that's very important as well, which you can certainly have more freedom of movement before she farrows. All of that helps with the process of farrowing. And really importantly, it actually helps with things like constipation, which is one of the big issues that the sows have when they transition from their dry house, their pregnancy
Right.
environment to farrowing. And that all impacts birth. So then you have piglets that possibly suffers more dystocia, which is more oxygen deprivation, and you're already on the back foot, let alone thinking about the low birth weight and having all of these piglets. If the sow can give birth well, that's a that's the first priority. And then the stock person is there to help her and help the piglets after that. That's what I would say. Mothers matter.
Yeah. Very good.
It's a
Excellent.
much longer answer than you probably asked.
No, that's fantastic. And it really, I mean, you've led into my last question is what can pig producers do on farm to give these piglets a chance to not just survive, but to thrive? And it starts with the sow, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. That's the starting point. Are there any other tips and tricks. You talked a little bit about once these piglets are out, get colostrum in them, right? Get them warm.
Get them warm.
Are there
Yeah.
other things that are high priority on that, really that first 24 to 48 hours?
Yeah, so getting the stress levels down in the house full stop is always good, and the stress of the sow, stress of the stock person, and multiple piglets is a bit of a stressor. So those piglets, they're always going to drop their temperature. Now you don't want to turn the farrowing house temperature up high because the sow can get heat stressed. Okay,
Right.
so you're going to keep that managed at 20, 20, 22. But a lot of piglets, I would say a covered creep would be better.
Okay.
Heat mat, put some substrate down, some straw, dry them off, make sure that's there. I know it can be a problem with the slats. Get them warm, have your marker pen with you, observe the sows, go through, see who's suckling, make sure they've got bellies when you feel them, check
Right.
out their umbilical cord. Do not move them off that mother until they're dry. If you have to move them, they need to have had colostrum before they're moved.
Okay.
So there's some, that's really important. It's from an immunity perspective, it's much more efficient if they can suckle from their own mother first.
Right.
The way they absorb the IgGs, that's really important. So we would then say, really, you're looking at it'd be great if they can have 4 to 6 hours of their own mother's colostrum before you make your decisions based
Right.
on, whether you have to use nurse sows or foster sows. But in those first few hours, it's warmth and colostrum and making sure the sow is actually lying down and producing that, right? And is
Right.
comfortable. So that's what I mean about reducing that stress. And then it's probably split suckling. So having really good people in your farrowing house to, be diligent and keeping an eye on all of these litters. On the top of the creeps or things like that, say, when you last, if you were split suckling, which is dividing the
Mhm.
litter, putting some in the make sure they're warm.
Yeah.
The ones that aren't on the sow, make sure the ones that are on the sow have a good, decent, at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half with mum, because that should get you. She'll be letting down continuously for about 12 hours from the start of farrowing, and then she'll go cyclical to about every 20 minutes. So a
Okay.
good hour and a half with, just enough piglets at the udder at that time, and the rest shut in the creep. That should make sure they at least get 1 or 2 sucklings, even if there's a problem. But that needs to be timed. So then you need to have somebody on coming back round and making sure they swap them out, making sure there's ventilation in that creep space as well. There's these real attention to details. And I think having that kind of decision support tree is really important. And the other decisions are thinking about those piglets that are thinking about those physical characteristics again of those piglets, and thinking about the ones that are more compromised than the others and what you might have to
Mhm.
do with those. The other thing I should mention on that note is looking out for things like meconium aspiration syndrome, which is when you
Okay.
find piglets just after birth, they might be quite brown, they might be tinged with brown, or they might be slightly spotted. And sometimes these are the bigger piglets.
Okay.
And what's happened there is they've suffered the compression of the umbilical cord, and
Oh.
meconium is sort of the first fecal matter. And what's happened is they've expelled that whilst still in utero because of compression of their umbilical cord. And then they've aspirated that because when the umbilical cord is compressed, the reaction is to take a breath, which makes sense when you're
Right.
out.
Yeah.
But actually, they've aspirated, meconium, and they've possibly aspirated other things, and that can really affect them. So uh, they can be very vulnerable. They're quite chilled, so they need to be dried off. But also, you can see they've suffered a bit of oxygen deprivation. So those piglets quite often need a bit of help as well. Warmth, colostrum, keeping an eye on them. And sometimes that's not only the low birth weight. That can be the big piglets that have been stuck in the birth canal.
Interesting. Right. That's interesting. And and I want to go back to one of the question or one of the things that you were talking about with colostrum, because do we have enough colostrum for all of these big litters? You were saying make sure that that they
Yeah.
get colostrum from their own sow, but what if there's not any colostrum left? Does that,
Yeah,
I
so,
mean,
so
I assume that happens. So,
yeah, it does. Well, it's limited. So the sow is a limiting factor in the colostrum yield.
right.
Piglets actually, within reason, they'll just keep drinking it if they can. The selection for large litter size has not come with an equivalent increase in colostrum yields
Right.
and colostrum quality. So unfortunately, you're right. So the new research that's coming out of one of the Finnish groups is really each piglet needs at least 250 grams worth of colostrum,
Right.
to really see them have the immunity. We'd say actually 300 grams would be better for survival and thriving. Now nobody's going to really measure that as
Right.
much as they're going to measure it. So it's basically just checking those bellies and making sure they've got as much in. What we do know, which hasn't changed as well, is that colostrum is essentially available. The best quality colostrum is in that first 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you'll see it's still available. She's still producing it for essentially 2 days, but it's starting to lose its quality.
Okay.
So for the first 2 days, she's producing colostrum, and then it starts to transition to milk,
Okay.
a kind of transition milk.
Right.
And the difference is important because colostrum is where all the immunity is coming from.
Mhm.
There is some stuff later, but that's what we really need. And after 2 days, 48 hours, the piglet's gut closes, and that's to make sure that no pathogens get in. So there's a physiological thing happening there. But of course, if you've got a piglet that hasn't had enough colostrum in those first 2 days, you can put them on, you can put them on new farrowing sows. It's not doing anything immunity wise at all. It's maybe just giving them, nutrition if they
Right.
haven't had enough in those first few days from their mum. So really, that's why those 6 hours with mum's important. But you can already see the disconnect here. The first 4 hours is still that's really good quality. But you've got
Yeah.
a sow that might be giving birth for 9 hours.
Yeah.
So we're always going to have compromises. So yeah, it's difficult for the sow to manage it. You can get replacers. It's never quite the same. Like it's difficult to milk a pig, right? So I say if you can keep with mum, that's great. But if the piglet needs colostrum no matter what. So if you really are struggling and you've got another sow farrowing, then you need to manage that to make sure each piglet has a decent dose of colostrum. There's also some work looking at, providing energy to the animals as well, like a little bit of energy supplement, because some of it is getting them going
Yeah.
so that they can then get to the udder and colostrum. You've got to balance that a little bit, just because you don't want to really fill their bellies. But there are, products out there that are good and to help with that. It's just sort of, again, it's another tool for the farmer
Right.
um, to help with this.
Right. The farmer, the caretaker, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made pretty quickly during this process, I'm sure. So it's,
Yeah, but it's worth it. I suppose that's what I'd say. Is that time and effort, even if it requires extra staff, if you set them up well at that time,
right.
then that's the thriving part, right? And you want to be able to keep them with mum. I suppose what's tricky is if she's got however many functional teats she's got, trying to keep, you need to set up that teat order really nice and stable in the first few days. So piglets are faithful to one teat. This is what
Okay.
happens. And it makes sense in nature. What happens when you have teat fidelity is each piglet has their teat. Each time she calls them to the milk bar, they know what they're suckling from. There may be a bit of squabbling,
Right.
but it's stable. And that means that she's comfortable when she lets down and they know where they're meant to go. And that's stable all the way through to weaning. When it's disrupted because there's too many piglets, you just get all this instability. Or if they're cross-fostered too much,
Right.
that each time they're having to try and find a teat again, you just create instability, disrupted sucklings, she's up and down, and actually it's just a really busy period.
Right.
So you don't want to be doing too much moving around of piglets. You don't want to be doing any real movement around of piglets, 1-to-1 after 2 days, really. That's the other recommendation. If you have to move, it's probably more about nurse sows or it's called shunt fostering sometimes, where you're having to move entire litters.
Okay.
Because if you move animals, what we know from research is that those animals just continue to be problems. If you keep
Right.
moving an animal that's not thriving on one litter, it doesn't help moving it to
Doesn't
another.
help.
It's just going to
Okay.
cause a problem for that litter, and that poor animal is just going to continue to lose condition.
Got it.
But because we can't, they're just generic pink piglets.
Right.
And there's lots of them. You don't know which one you've kept an eye on, but the likelihood is the foster. They don't do as well. They
They
do
just
much
don't.
better with their kin. So there's lots of fostering decisions as well.
Yeah, very good. Well, hey, thank you, Emma, for all the information today. This was fantastic. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Nice to speak to you.
This is Sarah Meitzel with the Pig site, working in collaboration with Life Start Swine.